Okay, welcome back for another deep dive. And let me tell you, we've got a real doozy for you today. It feels like every time you turn around, there's another headline about President Trump's second term
Right.
and all the changes that he's making.
It
It's a
is.
lot to keep up with.
It certainly is a whirlwind of activity.
And honestly, it can feel pretty overwhelming. So that's why we're here to help you sift through it all. We're going to dive into uh, the source material you sent us. News articles, policy documents, those juicy legal analyses,
Right.
and really pull out the most important nuggets.
The goal is to equip you with a clear understanding of exactly what's happened in these first few weeks,
Yeah.
what the potential impact could be, and the legal and ethical questions that these actions are raising.
We're talking big stuff here.
Yeah.
Federal funding freezes, mass resignation offers,
Mm-hmm.
and this mysterious Project 2025 that everybody keeps mentioning.
That's right. And perhaps the most impactful move so far has been this federal funding freeze.
Right. It sounds like this isn't just your typical new administration review of spending.
Right.
This is something much bigger,
It's definitely different.
isn't it?
We're talking about a temporary halt on trillions of dollars in federal grants and loans. It's sending shockwaves through government agencies, states, local communities, pretty much everyone.
It sounds like absolute chaos. I read that people are panicking trying to figure out what this all means for them.
There's definitely a lot of confusion and concern out there, and one of the most interesting aspects of this funding freeze is its connection to something called Project 2025.
Okay, so what is Project 2025? It sounds kind of ominous.
Think of it as a conservative blueprint for reshaping the entire federal government. It essentially lays out a vision for shrinking the federal bureaucracy, centralizing power in the executive branch, and pushing a specific ideological agenda.
So it's like a roadmap for how they want to change the government.
Exactly. And the memo from the Office of Management and Budget announcing this funding freeze, well, one of the articles you sent said it was like they took a page straight out of Project 2025's playbook.
Wow, that's a pretty direct link. And I read that they're using this freeze to target specific programs.
Yeah.
Some were even called wicked and pernicious.
Yeah, wicked and pernicious is right.
That's harsh.
Yes, the administration is very clear that this freeze is about aligning spending with President Trump's executive orders. They're focusing on programs they see as wasteful or ideologically opposed to their agenda.
Okay.
Things like diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, environmental programs, anything they associate with the Green New Deal.
So they're saying this is just a temporary pause,
Right.
but it really feels like it's about fundamentally changing the role of government, wouldn't you say?
That's certainly a valid interpretation, and it raises a big question. Does President Trump actually have the authority to do this? Congress controls the purse strings, so can he just unilaterally freeze spending like this?
Yeah, that seems like it would be a huge legal issue.
It is. It's already sparked a major legal battle. There are lots of legal scholars arguing that this freeze is a blatant violation of the separation of powers.
But the White House is defending their actions right.
Oh, absolutely. They're pushing back hard, saying that the president is well within his rights to do this. One article even quoted a White House spokesperson as saying, the White House counsel's office believes that this is within the president's power to do it, and therefore he's doing it.
Wow, it sounds like a real showdown is brewing.
It definitely is, and all of this is happening against a backdrop of real-world consequences. It's easy to get lost in the political maneuvering, but we have to remember that these actions are impacting people's lives.
Exactly. It's not just some abstract political game. These decisions have real-world impacts.
Right. One article even pointed out that programs that are supposed to be exempt from the freeze are experiencing disruptions like the Medicaid system, which provides health coverage to millions of low-income Americans. It was temporarily thrown into chaos because of this freeze.
So even if some programs are technically exempt, the way this whole thing was rolled out was so messy that it's causing problems everywhere.
That seems to be the case. There are reports of all sorts of programs in limbo, Meals on Wheels, support for homeless veterans, scientific research,
Right.
all because of this funding freeze. It's creating a lot of uncertainty and anxiety.
It's like they just flipped a switch and shut down huge parts of the government without really thinking through the consequences.
And to make matters even more complicated, a federal judge has already blocked the freeze, at least temporarily. She essentially said the government doesn't even know which programs are actually affected. It's kind of mind-blowing.
So what happens now? Does this mean the freeze is over?
Not necessarily. This is almost certainly heading to the Supreme Court.
So we've got a major power struggle between the president and Congress,
Right.
a legal battle brewing,
Yep.
and people on the ground are caught in the crossfire.
It's a tense situation for sure, and it's a lot to unpack, but you've given us a lot to think about.
You're telling me, and we're just getting started, there's another big development we need to discuss. This whole business about millions of federal workers being offered paid resignations.
Ah, yes, the buyouts.
Yeah.
That's another fascinating piece of this puzzle.
It definitely grabbed my attention. The headlines are screaming about mass firings and a government purge. What's the real story here?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's unpack these buyouts. What's the deal with 2 million federal workers being offered paid resignations? It sounds pretty dramatic.
It is a significant move, but the situation is a bit more nuanced than some of the headlines suggest. It's not a forced firing, but a very enticing offer to leave.
So they're essentially paying people to quit their government jobs.
Exactly. The administration is offering a voluntary separation incentive, a buyout essentially, with a generous financial package. Employees who accept will be paid through the end of September regardless of when they actually resign.
Wow, that's a pretty sweet deal, but what's the strategy here? Why are they doing this?
There are a few possible explanations. On one hand, it aligns with the administration's goal of downsizing the federal workforce, a key element of their Project 2025 plan. This buyout offers a quick and efficient way to reduce the number of government employees.
That makes sense, but there's more to it than just downsizing, right? It feels like there's a political angle here, too.
You're right to be perceptive. The buyout program is raising concerns about potential targeting of individuals perceived as disloyal or opposed to the president's agenda.
So they're using this buyout as a way to get rid of people they see as political enemies.
That's a concern many are voicing, and it raises potential legal issues. Using a buyout program to target specific individuals or groups could be seen as a violation of their rights. There's a lot of debate about whether this is a legitimate use of the program or a way to purge dissenting voices from the government.
It definitely raises some red flags. The source material you provided highlighted an email from the Office of Personnel Management, the Fork in the Road email, that really underscores this concern.
That email was pretty stark. It warned federal employees that most agencies would be downsized, many would be furloughed or made easier to fire, and there was no guarantee of job security.
It sounds like they're trying to create a culture of fear and uncertainty within the government.
It's certainly a strong message, and it seems intended to reshape the workforce in line with the administration's goals.
And speaking of reshaping, one of the sources mentioned a curious connection to Elon Musk and his takeover of Twitter.
Ah, yes. It's quite intriguing. You see, Elon Musk, who heads the new Department of Government Efficiency, is known for his cost-cutting measures. He offered Twitter employees a similar deal, 3 months severance to leave after his acquisition. The Fork in the Road email is remarkably similar in tone and content.
Wow, you're right. The language, the deadlines, even the subject line, it's all very similar. It makes you wonder if Musk's strategy at Twitter inspired this mass resignation push within the government.
It's a fascinating parallel. It certainly raises questions about the influence of private sector tactics on government operations.
Okay, so let's say a significant chunk of the federal workforce actually takes this buyout and walks away. What are the potential consequences of that?
The potential ramifications are considerable. You risk a brain drain, losing decades of experience and expertise, which could cripple the government's ability to function effectively. Replacing that institutional knowledge isn't easy.
It's not like you can just snap your fingers and have all that experience back.
Precisely. And beyond the loss of personnel, there's the disruption to vital services. Think about everything the federal government does. Travel and passports, taxes and benefits, scientific research, national security, all of these could be severely impacted.
So let's not forget the human impact on the workers themselves. Their lives are being turned upside down by this.
Absolutely. And it's not just the individual workers. Their unions are also pushing back. We're already seeing legal challenges emerge, and this is likely just the beginning.
It sounds like a very volatile situation.
Yeah.
So we've got this massive funding freeze, and now this push to shrink the federal workforce through buyouts. Are these two actions connected?
They certainly seem to be part of a larger strategy. Both point towards a desire to exert greater executive control over the government and challenge traditional power structures.
And all of this is happening against the backdrop of this Project 2025 plan, which seems to be the guiding philosophy behind so much of what the administration is doing.
Yes. Project 2025 provides essential context for understanding the motivation and goals behind these actions.
It's like a blueprint for their vision of how the government should operate.
Precisely. And it's not just about restructuring, it's also about actively dismantling the legacy of the previous administration.
You're right. It's not just about the money and the people. They're also going after Biden's policies. Give us some examples. What are they targeting?
Well, one of the most notable examples is the rollback of fuel economy standards. The new Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy, has ordered a reevaluation of the rules put in place to encourage automakers to produce more fuel-efficient vehicles.
So they're easing up on the auto industry.
Essentially, yes. They argue that the previous standards were too costly and made new cars unaffordable for the average family. In fact, one of the articles you shared quoted an administration official saying, "Artificially high fuel economy standards impose large costs that render many new vehicle models unaffordable for the average American family and small business owner."
That makes sense on the surface. I can see how that would be a popular move with the auto industry.
It certainly has its supporters, but it's also generating a lot of criticism from environmental groups who argue that those standards are crucial for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and combating climate change.
So it's another one of those moves that pleases some people while upsetting others. A classic political balancing act.
Exactly. And it highlights the administration's willingness to prioritize certain interests, even if it means potentially undermining environmental protections.
What other policies are they going after?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about General Mark Milley, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under President Biden.
Who's General Milley? Fill me in.
He was the top military advisor to President Biden, but he clashed with President Trump during the first term and has been publicly critical of the administration.
So this is payback time.
It appears that way. The new defense secretary has taken a series of actions against General Milley, revoking his security detail, suspending his security clearance, launching an investigation into his conduct. They're even considering demoting him in retirement.
Wow, they're really going after him. That sends a pretty chilling message.
It does. It suggests that loyalty to the administration is paramount, perhaps even above experience, expertise, or military service. One of the sources even quoted a defense official as saying, "Undermining the chain of command is corrosive to our national security, and restoring accountability is a priority for the Defense Department under President Trump's leadership."
That's a pretty strong statement. It seems like they're trying to make an example of him.
That's certainly one interpretation. And then there's the issue of foreign aid, an area where President Trump has historically been quite skeptical.
What are they doing on that front? Are they cutting off aid completely?
Initially, they announced a sweeping freeze on almost all foreign aid programs, but they later clarified that life-saving humanitarian assistance would continue.
So they're being selective about what they fund.
Very much so. They're continuing to support programs that provide basic necessities like food, water, and shelter. However, they're excluding anything they deem to be woke.
Woke? What does it even mean in this context?
It's a bit of a loaded term, but essentially they're not funding anything related to abortion, family planning, or what they call gender ideology.
So they're imposing their own ideological framework on foreign aid decisions.
Exactly. It's foreign aid with a very specific political filter.
So we've got this funding freeze, this push for mass resignations, and now all of these policy reversals. They're really moving fast, aren't they?
They certainly are. The speed and decisiveness of their actions are remarkable. They're not just talking about making changes, they're actively implementing them.
It's like they came into office with a to-do list, and they're just checking things off one by one.
It's a very focused and determined approach, and it's raising a lot of questions about what this all means for the future of the country.
Okay, so let's talk about the big picture. We've covered a lot of ground. The funding freeze, the buyouts, the policy reversals. What are the overarching themes that are emerging from all of this? What does it all mean?
Well, I think there are a few key themes that are really important to understand. First, we're seeing an unprecedented assertion of executive power.
What do you mean by that?
The administration is claiming a level of authority and control that pushes the boundaries of what we've traditionally seen from presidents, both legally and politically. They're challenging the norms of governance.
They're essentially saying, we're in charge and we're going to do things our way.
That's one way to put it. And that brings us to the second key theme. A willingness to push legal boundaries and challenge the traditional separation of powers. The funding freeze is a prime example of this. They're essentially disregarding Congress's power of the purse and daring anyone to stop them.
It feels like they're playing a high-stakes game of chicken with the Constitution.
The stakes are certainly high. And then there's the third theme. A disregard for established norms and procedures. We see this in how they're handling personnel decisions, ignoring certain legal requirements, and generally operating in a way that departs from traditional practices.
It's like they've thrown out the rule book and are writing their own as they go along.
That's a vivid way to describe it. And remember, all of this is happening within the context of Project 2025, which seems to be their guiding philosophy.
Right. Project 2025 provides a lens through which we can understand their motivations and goals.
Exactly. One of your sources included a quote from a constitutional law expert that I think really sums it up. The presidency is supposed to be limited by the law and by the Constitution, and Trump sees it quite differently, that he is empowered to do whatever he wants. And that really is a vision of authoritarian control.
Wow. Authoritarian control is a strong term. A lot of people are expressing concerns about that.
It's a valid concern, and it's important to bring all of this back to you, the listener. We've been discussing these big picture themes and high-level political battles, but this is all having a real impact on people's lives.
Exactly. The funding freeze is disrupting programs people rely on. The buyouts are creating anxiety for federal workers. And the policy changes are affecting everything from the cars people drive to the health care they receive. This isn't just a theoretical discussion. It has real-world consequences.
You're absolutely right. And that leads to a crucial question. What does this all mean for the future of the country?
What are the implications for democracy and the rule of law? These are questions we all need to be asking ourselves.
You've hit the nail on the head, and those are precisely the questions we need to grapple with as we move into the final part of our deep dive.
We've covered a lot of ground today. It's been quite a journey so far, but we've only just begun to scratch the surface. There's still so much to explore and understand. So we talked about this unprecedented assertion of executive power, the willingness to push legal boundaries, and the disregard for established norms. It all feels very unsettling, to be honest.
Yeah, it's definitely a turbulent time, and there are valid reasons for concern. But I think it's important to remember that our system of government is designed to withstand challenges. We have checks and balances in place for a reason.
Right. The framers of the Constitution knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
They built in safeguards to prevent any one branch from becoming too powerful.
Exactly. And we're seeing those safeguards being tested right now. The courts are already pushing back against the funding freeze, and Congress is starting to flex its muscles as well.
It sounds like a real power struggle is developing.
It is. And it's going to be fascinating to watch how this plays out. Will the courts ultimately rein in the administration's actions? Will Congress find its backbone and assert its authority? These are the big questions that are hanging over everything we've discussed.
And those questions lead to an even bigger one? What does this all mean for the future of our democracy?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Are we witnessing a temporary shift in the balance of power, or is this the beginning of a more fundamental change in how our government operates?
It's a bit unnerving to think about, like we're standing on the edge of the unknown.
There's definitely a sense of uncertainty in the air, but I think it's important to remember that history is full of examples of democracies facing challenges and emerging stronger on the other side.
Yeah, that's a reassuring thought. We've faced tough times before, and we've always found a way through.
Exactly. And I believe we have the tools and the resilience to navigate this current challenge as well. It requires informed citizens who are engaged in the process, who are asking tough questions, and holding their leaders accountable.
That's where you, the listener, come in. We've tried to provide you with a clear and insightful overview of what's happening, but it's up to you to decide what you think about it all. What are your takeaways? What are your concerns? What are your hopes for the future?
We've given you the information, the context, the analysis. Now it's time to process it all, to engage in thoughtful discussions, and to participate in shaping the future of our democracy.
You know, this deep dive has been a real eye-opener for me. I feel like I have a much better understanding of the complexities of the situation now.
Right.
And honestly, it's a bit overwhelming.
It's a lot to digest, for sure. But remember, knowledge is power.
Right.
The more we understand what's happening, the better equipped we are to navigate these turbulent times and to make informed decisions about our future.
So where do we go from here? What should people be paying attention to? What actions can we take?
Well, first and foremost, stay informed. Keep reading, keep listening, keep asking questions. Pay attention to what's happening in Congress, in the courts, and on the ground.
Don't just rely on headlines or sound bites. Dig deeper. Get multiple perspectives and form your own informed opinions.
Exactly. And then engage. Talk to your friends, your family, your elected officials. Participate in the public discourse. Let your voice be heard.
Write letters, attend town halls, make your views known. Our democracy thrives on citizen participation.
And finally, don't give in to cynicism or despair. These are challenging times, but they're also times of great opportunity. We have the power to shape the future of our country, but it requires us to be active and engaged citizens.
We can't just sit back and hope for the best. We need to be informed, engaged, and willing to stand up for what we believe in.
Well said. This deep dive has been a journey, hasn't it? We've explored some pretty complex and challenging issues, but I hope you found it valuable.
I know I have. It's really helped me to make sense of everything that's happening, and I think it's a great reminder that even in the face of uncertainty and challenge, we have the power to shape our own destiny.
That's a powerful message to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and keep exploring, keep questioning, keep engaging.
And to all our listeners out there, remember, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay curious.